Welcome, everyone, to this special session on storytelling for climate change. And for those of you who are not regular attendees at our biweekly sessions, I wanted to remind us all of our mission in the Healthy Planet Action Coalition. We have a unique mission globally. We advocate for the world community to urgently come together to carry out a science-based plan of action that includes direct cooling of the climate through sunlight reflection, ecosystems restoration, and other safe and effective means, along with accelerating emissions reduction and deploying large-scale removal of atmospheric carbon dioxide. Now, the goal of these actions, along with enhanced and transformative adaptation and regenerative measures, is to reduce the average global temperature from its current 1.5 plus degrees to well below 1 degree in the coming decades to regenerate a healthy climate. So with that in mind, let me introduce our leader today for the masterclass, Professor Jules Pretty. Jules is a friend of HPAC and an author and scientist. He is Emeritus Professor of Environment and Society at the University of Exeter, and he is a regular speaker on the climate crisis and how stories create agency, and on the great contemporary journey to a low-carbon economy. He frequently offers story masterclasses and climate classes. So he brings a lot of experience in this area to us today, and we look forward to taking advantage of his leadership on this. So with that, Jules, let me turn over the floor to you, and let's get started.
Thanks very much, Dennis. Hello, everyone. People often have this slight slip where they transfer me from Essex to Exeter, which is about a 400-kilometer shift within the UK. So I'm actually at Essex. Rather
Did I say Exeter?
You did. That was your slip.
Oh my goodness.
But that's okay. I am going to say in a bit that words matter a lot, but actually that doesn't really matter because people can easily find out where I am. I'm delighted to have this chance to lead this group today and in 2 weeks' time on a story masterclass. I've written a number of books. I have an H index of 113, 85,000 citations, so some credibility on the science side as well as on how we write and how we use words and how we use them to engage with people, not just to tell them. And the curious thing is, this is a storytelling masterclass, but actually it's not just about telling, it's about engaging. And I will kind of come back to that in a little bit. So I'm going to lead us through the workshop using a PowerPoint, and I hope you can all see that now. Yep, thumbs up, lovely, great, okay. And I wouldn't normally do this, but online it's slightly easier to just kind of structure our session. This is what we're going to do today. We're going to explore what is story and what is not. We're going to be thinking about ensuring how our stories are about transformations, about shifts, tipping points, major social, ecological, physical shifts, personal psychological shifts as well, which is a central component of all stories. We're going to be producing tangible stories from your experiences and aim to produce a story bank and implementation ideas for HPAC. And so the way we're going to do this today is I'm going to use 4 methods to create narrative arcs and story content. And I'm going to be asking all of you to be the creators. So if we were in the same room together, we would be split into groups and discussing this. So it's slightly different because I'm going to be asking each of you to work on your own for these short methods and then to reflect back some of the findings that you've had. So I hope you will enjoy doing that, because it's quite creative and interesting, and it'll be based upon your own experiences. And we hope at the end of this to produce innovative, inventive content that we can then use in part 2, which is on the 24th of July, same time, same place, all of that sort of thing. And then we're going to be exploring implementation pathways, identifying many and diverse options that we can use around story, and then thinking about how we might use some of that for engagement. So this is part 1, creating rough and ready story content. We're not going to be editing or doing what you do in a green room of screenwriting or story writing. It's not that kind of thing today. So broad-based ideas about story. So that's the aims of what we're going to be doing. What I'd like to do first of all is just spend a few minutes going through some background to story, what it is and what it isn't. And I usually frame this in terms of actually 3 global crises: the climate one, as Dennis just mentioned, the nature crisis, and the social inequality crisis, you could say the fairness crises across the world, which are interlinked. And so the key questions I'd like to raise and explore today is how to talk about these crises without making people more anxious, and yet increase knowledge and the sense of urgency. So it's a difficult line to draw, and it's a kind of difficult territory that we find ourselves in at the moment, where there is a huge sense of agency, of urgency, but we lack agency in many parts of the world. Bertolt Brecht said in 1939, the playwright, he said, "In the dark times, will there be singing?" And he said, yes, there will also be singing about the dark times. And in a sense, this is where we find ourselves now. In crises, in new crises, words often fail us. And yet we have to find ways of creating song, story, sagas, poems, prose, all sorts of ways of engaging with people in different forms to help shift us out of these dark times. Dennis kindly sent round the short paper that I've written called "What Makes Good Story." If you haven't already seen it, you can just jump over to my website at julespretty.com, and you will find that PDF is easily downloadable if you want to look at it whilst we're doing this. But otherwise, just look at it afterwards. It gives you kind of this sort of sense of what story is and what it isn't. Okay, so this is what I think good story is. Story does 4 things. It maps multiple paths from here. It sets out lots of options and is not reductive. So it's inventive in terms of kind of opening things up. We may feel we know what needs to happen in a particular context, but if we just set one option in front of the public, that could be they have a binary choice, accept or reject. And it's much better, in my experience, and we're going to come back to this, to present lots of options and let people choose. So first of all, multiple paths. Secondly, all story contains transformations, moments of ratchets and tipping points where something happens and there's no going back. That's what we're trying to do. And by telling story, we show how these transformations happen. And by analogy, allow people to think, oh, I see you're talking about trying to do that with climate, are you? We may not even be talking about climate, but we may be referring to it. Story should create agency, leading to action, and bring people together, thereby building social capital. So there are those 4 aims of what we're intending to do with good story. And it's quite clear if we look through human history that ecosystems and stories co-evolve and change together. And in a sense, that's what we're also recognizing here, that the shifts in natural systems are closely interwoven with the way that we talk about those things and the way that we understand them. So in that sense, story maps onto life. Moments and times of transformation are common human experiences. We recognize them when we hear them in story. And regardless of our cultural context, language, history, understanding, we all understand those big moments in life when you go from infancy to your first school, if you get that opportunity, or you go to big school, or you start work for the first time, or you have a partnership, or you get a job, or you lose a job, or you have an opportunity and it's snatched away from you. And all of those big changes in life are the same things that happen to everybody everywhere. And that's why story is universal, because it talks about those transformative moments. So where we find ourselves now is in a position of needing to be as inventive and creative as we have ever been because of the magnitude of the crises and of the challenges that we face. And we're going to have to be, and I'll say this again in a little bit, so inventive and creative because we may not need to talk or may not want to talk about how bad things are, because that may just make people even more anxious. So there's a conundrum there. And I don't think I have a solution for that, but I know what doesn't work and I know what does work. And there's a kind of gray area in between that we'll come back to. So story starts at the hearth, by the flickering fire, after food. People are now going to be reflecting on how things were during the day. The children are wide-eyed, faces upturned. Story then becomes a rehearsal for life itself, because people talk about what's happened and people listening hear about that and understand something more about the world without risk, without actually having to face the dangerous animal or the conflict or the difficult river crossing or whatever it is, because that's just being told to them and we learn about the world. So in that sense, story is rehearsal. The famous Diné Navajo storyteller, Yellow Man, said this. He said, if children hear stories, they'll grow up to be good people. If adults hear stories, they'll know what to do. In a sense, that's the challenge that we face at the moment, is that we wish to use story to help people to know what to do. However, in the Anthropocene, we also find that story is commonly an antonym. Children are chided for telling tales. The word myth is often taken to mean a lie. Story is often assumed to be a fiction and therefore non-credible. And so we face, in using the language of story, also some norms, some relatively recent norms that suggest that these are terms that don't have kind of credibility. And yet, sports stars and actors are often called legends. There's a story language there. After a wonderful family occasion, a beautiful weekend, a romance, your daughter's wedding, you might say it was just like a fairy tale. So we use this language in different places, and in other places think that that may be troubling. So all I'm saying is story is common human history, and it's about transformations, and that's what we're going to be talking about here. If it's a good story, children say, tell it again. And there's a test. There's a kind of cultural evolutionary test here. If stories last a long time, they must be pretty good. They're connecting in some kind of way. And what we find is that we grow up in all human cultures with fairy tales, myths, legends, talking animals with agency, magic, dragons, wonderlands. The Red Queen in Alice in Wonderland said, why, sometimes I've believed as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. In a sense, that's what we've got to do now. We've got to believe in impossible things before breakfast, because that's the agenda that faces us. So story in that sense is a call to action and a call to think differently. 2 examples of what you might call fairy tales or just simply folk tales that have survived the tremendous amount of time. The most famous is the tale of the girl called Cinders who lives in the ash of the fire. The ash boy and the ash girl is a famous trope in lots of Northern European tales. The person who's left behind or rejected, who lives in the fireplace. And it's the classic rags to riches tale. Cinders is, of course, Cinderella. And there are at least 700 language versions worldwide of Cinderella. And it has been told for 1,300 years. It begins in Tang, China. That's the origination of the Cinderella tale. So something that's lasted for 1,300 years is not bad. So a little challenge for us is to be thinking, when we're creating stories, can we create stuff that was just going to last for, say, 1,000 years? Something like that. That's what we're trying to do. That's the power of the connection here. The Jack cycle of stories begins in the UK in about 1700, and Jack climbs the beanstalk to a special world, beats the giant, comes back with the treasure, and children think when they hear the tale, oh, so a small person can beat a noisy, dominant grown-up, the big person. That's interesting. The big person who stomps and stamps and eats the food first and tells them what to do and never listens to the children. And yet in this story, the small child is the one who wins. So there's a psychological component to the story here. That's why Jack and the Beanstalk is so well known and retold. It's because children get it without being told what it means. You don't need the little debrief afterwards. They understand what the story is all about. So that's the test of storytelling, is people immediately get it. Just a couple more slides and then we move on to the next phase. So all traditional stories, if you look at them, have moral content. They say something about what's right and wrong through the actions of the actors in the story. They contain instructions for living, and they contain these transformations that I've told you about. And if we go back to the very first human depictions of culture or art or language, the oldest art is from Sulawesi caves 54,000 years ago. Therianthropes, part animals, part humans communicating with each other. That's where the oldest piece of human culture exists. The oldest written story is Gilgamesh, the Epic of Gilgamesh from Mesopotamia, 4,000 years old, all about social and ecological transformations. And Ovid's Metamorphoses, another great survivor, 2,000 years for a single piece of work containing 250 tales of transformation, has survived because it connects with people. In those metamorphoses, you wash your face in a sacred well and you come away and you find you've sprouted antlers and suddenly you're now a deer. And now that you're a deer, you're going to be running from the hunters. They're after you. And there's no change. There's no going back at that point. That's the kind of moment of jarring transformation where life circumstances suddenly shift. So Ovid's Metamorphoses is all about that. Of course, what we're looking for is a different kind of alchemy. And story is alchemy, in a sense. It says you can take little bits of rubble and turn them into gold. And that's what we're going to be trying to do here. Bits of rubble can be turned into gold with the appropriate process and structure and intention. So let me just conclude this bit with two tables, just to summarize. And again, there's more about this in the paper that went round to everybody. Bad story is this list of things on the left-hand side. It doesn't engage audience. It tends to be exposition heavy. There's a lot of telling people about stuff. Often the solutions are pre-cooked. People have decided what's the right thing. There's often little co-production, and therefore it's easy for the audience to ignore it because they say, well, I wasn't involved in this in any way. doesn't admit vulnerability and uncertainty, and we're coming to this in the second exercise in a little while. Good story admits vulnerability. It seeks the voice of perfection, and we're trying not to do that here. Doesn't set out choices. And there's a phrase here that in story, people duck when they see data coming. And now that's a challenge for a lot of us, because if you stick heavy data in a story, that can actually undermine the power of the words. So you use data to create word components in stories. That sits in the background, not in the foreground. So good story is these things on the other side: igniting imagination, creating larger worlds, being immersive, and admitting vulnerability. People lean forward when it's a good story. And that's what we're trying to do, is to get people to lean in and say, tell me more. I understand what you're talking about. And here are some ground rules for our story masterclass. I want us to be thinking about telling people something good, even if we're struggling to think what that good thing is. So we're recognizing that the situation is stark, but we're not doing stories of gloom. We're going to assume everybody's in this climate action game already. It's just that a number of people haven't yet started. And that's just a way of thinking kindly about everybody, even those that you don't want to think kindly about. Let's just assume they're going to be in this game at some point. They just don't know that yet. So our audience is everybody. It's not just people like us. It's actually people not like us, because we're trying to kind of bring them into the game. We want to focus on imagination. We're going to think about trust, reciprocity, kindness, in order to get from individual to collective action. We're going to create new words, new talking points. We're not going to advocate single solutions, and that's really something for the second masterclass. And we're not going to blame failures on others. So where things haven't worked, we're going to be thinking about how we get out of the hole when things didn't work. And that's going to be the first exercise in just a moment. So here are three nice little quotes on story perspectives. Ursula Le Guin said, imagination is subversive. And her writings, of course, were full of imagination. So yeah, we're trying to subvert existing ways of thinking. Story creates warm data. That's Nora Bateson, the daughter of Gregory Bateson, the great ecological whole systems thinker, ecology of the mind work. So we can think of data as warm data. She writes very well about that. And Paul Coelho says, story bridges gaps where everything else has crumbled. And in a sense, that's also what we're trying to do, build these bridges when everything seems around us to have crumbled. So that's the background. Let us go forward. Exercise 1. I'd like to ask everybody in these 4 exercises, we're going to take about 10, 12, 15 minutes, depending on each of these exercises, for you to generate some content. Then I'm going to jump in and ask people to feed some of that back. I may not be able to get round to everybody because we haven't got the time to do that, but just kind of observations, some of the things that you've come up with. And then we're going to build in each of these exercises on what you've already done. So the focus here is on your personal experience, not the collective experience of everybody in the room here. We simply can't do that in an online masterclass, but it's fine. We'll still be able to produce lots of good content. So I want to ask you all if you would begin by thinking about transformation prouds. What are you proud of having achieved, or your institution achieved, or from your own experience or your own institution, something you admire? Some transformative project, especially where ideas have improved lives. This is a phrase I use a lot. Ideas, we're interested in ideas that improve lives. And there's a demonstrable link between that. You've got the idea something got better for people as a result of it. So all I really want at this moment is for you to think of 5 prouds. There's not a right answer or a wrong answer to this, but the diversity of people in the room will be really helpful to hear that in a few moments' time. And just add the institutional context. You know, where did this happen? Who was what project or activity are you referring? And what was the arc of change that is part of that proud? If I could add a further instruction, it would be open up a new Word file and write them in the Word file, because at the end of today's session, I'm going to ask everybody to send their 4 pieces of work to Dennis and to me by email. And then we're going to put that together in a form that can be used for the second story masterclass. So if you start by doing that at this point, if you want to handwrite them, you could take a photograph and send them, but otherwise you could type them on your machine whilst we're doing this this activity. The prouds should really be immediately recognizable to the public. They should be quite clear what you're talking about. Prouds are not all about me, so this isn't a puff piece. You know, I did this wonderful thing and it was just kind of brilliant. We want something kind of slightly different to that, and they should have kind of clear impact. So I think we're just going to take 7 minutes or so to do that, and then I'm going to just knock the screen off and open up more widely, just to ask a few people just to reflect, just to list their proud, so that we in the room can hear some of the range of stuff. There's not a lot of space now for discussion of those, but don't worry, we're getting to that. You might feel as though we're all kind of slightly separate satellites at the moment, but that is all going to come together. So could I therefore ask you to begin by doing that? And normally in a room there'd be lots of chatter and noise in the background. So what I'm going to do is just to play a little bit of Japanese Zen garden music in the background. If that's irritating to you, knock off your speaker for a couple of minutes. But it will just fit. I'm just playing it on a speaker here, and this is just going to be providing a little bit some forest music here in the background. So 7 minutes to write 5 prouds, and we're only looking for a couple of lines for each of these. Okay, so away you go, folks.
Jules, are you sharing the music?
I've got it on, but maybe it's not loud enough, is it?
No. The issue is that when you share something, you need to tick a box on the share to say that it's music coming from your computer. Otherwise,
No, it's not coming through the computer. It's a separate speaker.
Oh, okay.
Should just be coming. Are you not hearing it?
No,
No.
Not.
that's
Okay.
that's okay.
No, I think Robbie, there's a special thing you can do to. Yeah, I think I know what.
Okay. Well, maybe that's an innovation that's not working in this case.
No worries. Let's leave it for now.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's a story
it
behind
kind of
that.
works for me because it fills a bit of space because I'm the only person not working at the moment. You all are working. All right. Let's not worry about that. You carry on. I'll keep the Zen music in the background for me. So I've suggested 5. If you do at least 3, that'll be fine. We'll be using those in later exercises, but it's really just to open up your thinking into a kind of wider space here. Okay, one more minute, and then we'll ask for some feedback. Okay, good. All right, first bit done. Could I ask for volunteers to tell us about your top two, and literally kind of read them out. Just wait what it is. So, Robert, you had your hand up first of all, so go with it. Top two.
Okay, my top two that I wrote an article that was published in The Hill last month calling for an albedo accord, proposing a model of the Montreal Protocol on repairing the ozone layer as a way to repair the albedo layer of clouds and ice as a positive response to climate change. And a second one is that I give annual lectures to the Canberra Carl Jung Society, who is a great leader in storyteller, Carl Jung, and reflecting on my research on ethics and ontology and trying to find a positive story about a natural basis of Christianity and cosmology.
Okay, good. All right. Someone else, top two. Aria.
Hi, Jules. Thank you. I would say, I'm not sure about the top two, but I think I hosted a couple of conversations as part of Florida Climate Week. And, for the triad, and invited some HPAC guests. And it ultimately led to Jay Ponte, who was working with Adam McKay's production company, getting involved and getting some scientists involved in creating a scientific advisory committee for Adam McKay's production company. And also, I presented the climate triad on an Embracing Our Emergency course from Daniel Pinchbeck. And it was really wonderful, the feedback, the amount of people within the activist community who responded really favorably and who really got it. And a couple of people like Karen reached out and became allies.
Excellent. Lovely. That's great. Thank you. Has anybody got some that are kind of institutional? As part of working for this institution, this big thing happened that we're proud of. Dennis.
Yes, I think that the great story that I have derived from the last couple of years of my engagement with Healthy Planet Action Coalition is the story of my near-death experience in the Mount Pinatubo volcanic eruption in 1991. And then 3 decades later, I discover that this great force of nature generated a wonderful natural experiment of how global temperatures can be reduced by mimicking the process of lofting aerosols into the atmosphere. And so what was a great personal story of almost being killed by the volcanic eruption turns into something that could be a savior of humanity through using the principles that the volcano eruption was able to produce for scientists. That's number one. Number two is the discovery of how salt spray from the ocean could be the basis for rebrightening the clouds of the planet. They are rapidly losing their previous level of cloud cover, and the discovery of marine cloud brightening is an amazing story of scientific insight into how that natural process can be manipulated into a very important means of helping to save humanity from temperature rise.
Lovely. Okay, great. So I'm going to shorten things now and ask for the top one from various people. So Ron, sorry, it's a one now. But also, could I just offer guidance? Don't give me a long explanation of what it is. Try to make the proud very clear when you say what it is at the beginning. And you may find that hard because you may not have written it that way. But I'm going to just steer it in that form. So. Ron, over to you. Or have you?
Thank you, Jules. This is I've mentioned this indirectly in various times to people here, but I many years ago got involved in a political organization that was a very small, marginal, apparently marginal group, and a bunch of us, very sort of idealistic people, young folks, got involved, and we carried on, and it eventually became something, but it never really achieved, substantial influence that we were hoping it would achieve. And then, and so at some, later on in life, and various of us moved along, we had families, our lives moved on, and we moved to different places, and we kept working on this project, even though it increasingly seemed like just a hopeless exercise in, marginal nostalgia. Uh, and along came a fellow in U.S. And people will probably understand what I'm talking about, Bernie Sanders, and he started talking about the very thing that we were talking about, and this whole cohort of young people suddenly joined our organization and completely took it over. And this is sort of what we had been dreaming of. So this is meant to be an inspiration for HPAC. I mean, to some extent, that sometimes you work on something that's, just seems hopeless, and, and then you just keep at it, and magic happens. It becomes something significant. And this fellow Mamdani just got, won the Democratic primary in New York City, which was just incredible, that he would do this as a democratic socialist. So
Lovely. You're actually anticipating the territory we're going to move into in a moment. So hold that one. That's really nice.
Okay.
Cindy, I think you had your hand up. Go for it, Cindy.
So in Andhra Pradesh in India, there's 1 million farmers transitioning to pre-monsoon dry seeding and 365-day green cover. Back about 15 years ago, I joined a Google group, which resulted in one of my colleagues being picked up internationally and his voice being heard. Somebody made a video of a workshop of him. One person in Andhra Pradesh watched that video and did a 10,000 farmer trial. And that's led on to 1 million farmers now doing that practice. So I was a very small piece at the start of connecting into that, which I'm very proud of.
Brilliant. Love it. And I know the project very well, and the people involved in Andhra Pradesh very well. It's one of the best examples. That I'm looking for that. There's a thing that happened, an event timetable, somebody transforming something, and lots of people being influenced by it. So I want to push us into that space. A couple of other volunteers, and then we're going to move to the next bit at the moment. I'm not going to get round everybody, sorry, in all of this, but it also means if people want to kind of keep quiet, they can happily do that. Patrick, have you got something? Yeah, go on then.
I do. I was looking for how to raise my hand, but I couldn't find it. But
a real hand is fine.
Yes. Okay, good. So I like the story of an organization that was created around the time of the United Nations, and a woman psychologist who was working for Procter & Gamble decided that during a time when everyone was debating how to actually prepare diplomats to seek peace in a time we're just coming out of a major war, this psychologist decided that the best way to do it was to rally 11-year-old children from around the world in a camp setting where they could learn more about their similarities than their differences. And this camp is this organization is still functioning today. It's been working in 160 countries around the world with hundreds of thousands of youth who are now adults who have become leaders in building bridges around the world among different cultures and different nations.
Lovely. Excellent. What you're hearing here is there's an initiating moment or person where something then follows, a ratchet where something changes forever, and then an expansion phase where something is going on. So I'm looking for that. one last one, Herb, and then we'll move to the next exercise. So Herb, have a go.
Thanks. Oh, I don't know, 30 years ago or so, I came down with advanced cancer. The prognosis wasn't so great, and I found a remarkable alternative practitioner that I went to against the opposition of most everybody in my family. And here I am. And I was so grateful and inspired by his work and his theory of cancer that I sort of changed my career and opened up a wellness center to promote his work, and have continued to do so, and have counseled probably 200 or 300 people since then, and helped create an organization to keep his work alive.
Fantastic, lovely, that's great. I'm going back to the share slide stage at the moment. Great, you could lower hands if you want. So we've got some ideas of things that you've been thinking about that you're proud of having achieved. Now let's think about what the narrative arc associated with them. Some of you described it in that way. What I want now to do is to run a short exercise called Fortunately, Unfortunately. Okay, so it's a series of clauses. I'd like you to take a proud, and it could be the one that you've just given, or it could be a different one. You might think of a new one as a result of some of that feedback. Take a proud and expand it, and start in this way. You can start with unfortunately, or you can start with fortunately. So you can say, unfortunately, I was caught in a volcanic eruption. Fortunately, something happened, okay? Or you can begin with fortunately. And what I'd like you to do is to try to write out at least 5 rounds of 2 pairs of these. So unfortunately, biodiversity is falling in our area here. Fortunately, the local nature conservation bought a degraded field to change it. Unfortunately, no one knew what to do next. Fortunately, so I'm just looking for that short clauses of fortunately, unfortunately. Each statement should be linked to the previous one over time, and this will create a narrative arc. Now, some of you might have seen this very famous piece of a lecture, of a talk by Kurt Vonnegut, which he called "Man in a Hole," which is better described as "person in a hole" or "man, woman in a hole." You can see it on the web. And this is Fortunately, Unfortunately. And Vonnegut, great writer, talked about the shape of stories, and he graphed the shape of story in that chalk graph there, that someone starts up, they fall in a hole, and then they come out of the hole. So that's the unfortunately, fortunately bit. You fall and rise and fall. And he talked about the Cinderella story that I mentioned earlier on. And he said, I quote, "People love that story. They never get sick of it. They love the rags to riches component, the inspiration of Cinderella." And so this exercise is largely about falling in a hole and then coming out of the hole regularly. So fortunately, unfortunately, fortunately, unfortunately. What I like you to do is just take one of the prouds. It doesn't have to be the one you've given, but one of them, and write 5 clauses linked fortunately, unfortunately, unfortunately, fortunately, whichever one you want to start with. And I'll ask you to read them out and not explain, just to do that. Okay, just a short clause, a subclause. It might be just 5 or 6 words. I'm not looking for a sentence or a paragraph for each of these, but they are essentially focusing upon the vulnerabilities, the things that go wrong when we're engaged in transformations, in change, because it doesn't all work in a wonderful straight line. We fall in a hole, and then we have to climb out of the hole, and we learn something from that, and then we think we're winning, and then we fall in another hole, and then we have to do something different. So this exercise is called Fortunately, Unfortunately. Could you try that? Take one of them, take 2 if you wish, and just write them out. And I'll just ask people to read them out. We'll do this for 5 minutes now. and then I'll ask for some feedback on fortunately, unfortunately. We're deliberately looking for when things go wrong and then what happened to make them go right. Okay, away we go. Please do write them out in your file so that we can then see them later on. And don't worry about needing to be perfect. There's not any need for that at this moment. We're just interested in roughly hewn wood rather than polished. I think it should be self-evident, but each of those fortunately, unfortunately clauses is following a narrative arc over time. So that's what we're trying to do here. We're now creating a time-based story rather than a single event, and we're just teasing that apart. It could be over a day, it could be over a year or 10 years or more. Okay, one more minute. Okay, right. Fortunately, unfortunately. Volunteers. Anybody like to lead off? Mark. And then I think Robert.
Yeah, thank you. Unfortunately, nobody had heard of Drawdown. Fortunately, I was on a panel and two crazy ladies, strangers, stood up with the book. Fortunately, we got audience with the town board for a food scrap to compost program, but unfortunately, they didn't have any money to give us for the project. But fortunately, we found volunteers and donors. Unfortunately, the town only gave us 30 days to pilot. Fortunately, at least it didn't rain for the 30 days that we weighed the buckets outdoors every day. Unfortunately, COVID stopped the whole program. Fortunately, the Zoom was born, and we developed 2 webinars, which have been viewed hundreds of times. Unfortunately, COVID is over and we made no money. But fortunately, we've moved the program to 2 counties of 3 million people.
Brilliant. That's lovely. Great. Good stuff. That's nice. Well done. Excellent. Great stuff. Robert, I'm just going to take us through these, and I'll give a couple of observations afterwards. That's lovely. Great. Robert, have a go. I think you're on mute. The old problem.
Actually, being on mute is probably helpful in this case. But anyway, my issue was my introduction to complex adaptive systems theory, which had been utterly life-changing for me. So fortunately, I now have a much clearer sense of how change happens. Unfortunately, it's messy and offends conventional reductionist thinking. Fortunately, I had the opportunity to present these ideas in my book. Unfortunately, hardly anyone has read it. Fortunately, these ideas provide a secure basis for removing the threat of global warming. Unfortunately, most people have more urgent priorities than removing the threats from global warming. Fortunately, I shall soon turn 80, so I don't have much skin left in this game. Unfortunately, there is much suffering to come.
That's very well done. Very well done. Perfect. Thank you very much. Excellent. Nice. Going from tight to big. That's a nice way of doing that. Jonathan, I think you had your hand up next.
Thanks. Yeah, so fortunately, I have skills at building structures. Unfortunately, the weather was very powerful and destroyed almost all prototypes. Fortunately, each act of destruction led to insights for improving the design. Unfortunately, those upgrades added cost and weight to the devices. But fortunately, the world manufacturers made efficiency improvements of their own that lowered the costs back down.
Lovely. Great. Lovely. Really nice narrative arcs coming along here. Someone else? Hand up. Aria.
Yeah, mine is much shorter. And I want to read the one that I chose that's appropriate for HPAC. So unfortunately, the world has passed the point of no return for emissions reduction alone when it comes to fighting the climate crisis. Fortunately, if we act urgently, we can reverse the climate crisis when we add emissions removal and planetary brightening to our global climate strategy.
Lovely.
That's
and if you had a bit more time, you could just tease apart those and add in some more clauses, couldn't you? So that you've got the narrative arc is moving back and forth in that kind of way. Lovely. Great.
Yeah.
Good. I'm glad you tried that out. Another one. Someone else want to try one? Rebecca.
Unfortunately, Australian farming practices degraded the soil over many years. Fortunately, some wonderful innovators developed new techniques to rehydrate the soil with small weirs. Unfortunately, these practices are not yet well known or widespread. Fortunately, some scientists evaluated the regenerative practices and created a plan to restore Sydney's major dam and provide water for Sydney. Unfortunately, the lead person in the group died, and fortunately, an enthusiastic newbie picked up the project and made a video ready to market it with decision makers.
Lovely. Great. You can see with each of these that the content that we're describing can be applied into lots of different contexts. You know, we can use that in all of those prouds that you talked about earlier on, these narrative arcs and shifts. Very good. One more. Anybody else would like to have a go? Okay. Oh yeah, Patrick, go for it.
There we go. So I'm going to keep with this idea of this organization that was created for world peace. Fortunately, World War II ended and leaders of the world decided to form the United Nations to end wars. Unfortunately, no one knew how to educate diplomats in ways to prepare them to negotiate multilaterally for peace on the world stage. Fortunately, lots of people were convinced that peace colleges could do the trick. Unfortunately, no such college existed to do this work on a large scale, and many people believed adults would teach the art of peacemaking. Fortunately, a psychologist named Doris Twitchell Allen had the bright idea to start with children. She decided to create a camp and bring together 11-year-old children for 4 weeks to learn about each other through play, art, sports, and outdoor activities. Unfortunately, she did not have the resources to start an organization to try out her idea by hosting the first camp. Fortunately, Doris found funds at Procter & Gamble, and she hosted the first CISV camp with 50 11-year-olds in Cincinnati in 1950. Unfortunately, world peace is still a very tough task. Fortunately, Doris Allen was nominated for the Nobel Prize, recognizing her efforts for generations.
Fantastic. Lovely. Can you see how we've expanded the idea of a short, narrow description of a proud, which might be all that you might say about a topic, and now we're opening them up a bit. I'm asking you a rhetorical question just to think about for a moment, not necessarily for feedback, but how do you feel about admitting vulnerability? Because in a sense, that's what we're doing with this. We're saying it's not simple. We haven't got all of the answers. Things go down and then they come back again. And admitting vulnerability, comedians are brilliant at this. They tell stories about themselves that are full of vulnerabilities, and people connect with it and laugh and feel as though it's really something that they enjoy. It's really difficult to do, especially difficult, I think, for those engaged in science-based work, because we've learned to get rid of vulnerability and just present clear answers, having done the work. And I'm now saying, let's bring that back into the picture here. Let's bring that back and say, Robert, you started off by saying you were proud of an article, producing an article. Well, a vulnerability might have been, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth here, might have been at the beginning, I didn't think that this could happen, or I didn't think it would be published, and yet it was. And so you're kind of going from a kind of unfortunately to a fortunately context. And the more we do that, the deeper and more complex the story gets. And the more opportunity there is for the listener or the reader or the viewer to be drawn into a narrative and to feel a part of it. So that's why I said at least 5 is a really good number of those different clauses, because you're drawn in and you say, now I understand that. And I bet you remember those tomorrow quite well, the ones that have been given this kind of series of arcs, because we've been drawn into it. So thank you for that. We're just going to carry on pressing on, folks. This is the summary of the fortunately, unfortunately bit. We're creating up-down arcs of narrative, that there are flows of actions and they create energy. Good stories end with up energy. They propel the listener or the viewer into a space beyond the story. That's where action is created. That's where agency is created. There's honesty in noting that things are hard at times. And that's a critical part of story. You know, the hero tale has somebody sitting at home, and then along comes a trickster or a character or a wizard or some small chap with a big stick, in Star Wars, and suddenly the hero has to go off and do heroic things. But it's hard at the beginning, and then it gets harder. That's the territory we're in. The bigger the problem in a story, the better the payoff. So if we don't put problems in the story that we need to overcome, there's no payoff. The audience doesn't engage with it. So we need to make that problem really big. And I don't mean big like we're facing a really big climate crisis. I mean big because the thing that we were trying to make happen was really hard. Make your problem really big. And then when things work, people go, ah, that's nice. I like that because we're out of the hole and everybody feels happy about it. Okay, so we're going to press on now for number 3, the transformation story spines. This is another cut. So pick another proud, if you would, and I want you to write a spine of transformation. Bit more content here. Could I remind you to make sure that all of those unfortunately, fortunately, are in your file so that we can send them at the end. Now we're doing this thing called a transformation story spine. Take one, a different one, I think, probably at this point. And could you do this? Use this. You could write this down, and I'll leave it up for you to look at, but I'm going to give you an example in a moment. Once upon a time, such and such, and every day until one day, and because of that, and because of this, until finally, and ever since then, there's been some kind of outcome. That's the transformation story spine. And this is an example, okay? Once upon a time, there is a coastal community, and every day the tide comes in and out, until one day the sea rises up and up. And because of that, the people come together. And because of this, policies change locally and nationally, until finally all fossil fuels are stopped. Okay, well, there's a big leap there, but you get, this is just a story. And ever since then, they and the sea have been happy. So that's just an arc of story here, where we begin with the traditional once upon a time, there's a thing, a place, some people. Every day something happens, until one day something big changes. And because of that, further changes happen. And because of this, something else happens. So could you take one of those, one of your prouds, try something different if you feel comfortable with it. If not, take one that you've already been looking at, and have a go with that. Try this transformation story spine. And again, 3 or 4 minutes, I'm cutting the time down a bit, to have a go at writing your transformation story spine. Okay, once upon a time, begin it in the way of a traditional fairy tale. Don't know whether it helps to see the example I've given you there.
No, no. Don't talk to me. I'm working on something. No, I'm in it.
I'm going to bed in a minute.
Okay, let's have a go. We're going to do the final exercise. It's going to be something called enrichment, where we're just going to take what you've done now and just add some specific enrichments, just to give a flavor of how we would then enrich the roughed out story structure. So we've had one kind of structure that, unfortunately, this is the second kind of one. Anybody got something that they would like to read out, beginning with Once Upon a Time? Robert.
Once upon a time, people had no idea that religion could be combined with science, until one day Carl Jung observed that stories exist in the collective unconscious. Because of that, people started to explore an integration of religion and science. And because of this, new symbolic meaning was found in old stories, until finally a new practical and ethical vision of religious practice emerged. And ever since then, communities have been healing through a grounded vision of faith.
Fabulous. Fantastic. Lovely. Great. Really nice. Well done. Good. Next one. Don't be shy, folks. Go on.
Oh,
Somebody have a go. Ron. Yeah.
So this is a take on my other one. I just want to try this out because it's a little bit, anyway, it's very repetitive what I just said, but once upon a time, a small group of people wanted to work together to achieve something, but every day over time, it got harder and harder to keep working on this. Till one day, Bernie came along and a lot of younger people got inspired. And this has made a difference in many locations. Many people got elected. But now things are worse than ever. But we have some ability to try to change that. It's a, the trouble is the arc doesn't always.
No, the arc doesn't always work. I've been a bit unfair by only giving you 5 minutes, because if you'd had 15, and I would say you could then write, and ever since then, people have had more hope, even if you could then end on that sort of phrase. Okay, great. That's really nice. I like the fact that you've taken the same topic and you've done it differently, and you can see what happens when we apply a method, a structure to a topic. You get a different kind of depth to it in those different ways of doing it. Super. Thank you, Ron. Robert, yeah, go for it. Mute. You're muted. You're muted, Robert. Yeah.
Okay, can you hear me now? Yes.
Yeah, got it.
Once upon a time, I thought I was very clever. And every day I would justify the things I said and did to show how right and good I was. Until one day I did something stupid. And because of that, I wondered what else I had done that was stupid. And ever since then, I have ceased being so arrogant. Now I'm perfect.
That's a nice ending. Very good. Great. Good. This is really good. I did say admitting vulnerability is hard, and I'm glad that you have done that. And I'm glad also that we can have a little chuckle and a laugh about it, because that was my point about it. Rue, I think you had your hand out. You were going to have a go, were you?
Oh, yeah, sure. That's okay. Okay, so once upon a time, people in the greater Denver region realized that there is inequality when it comes to accessing nature. And every day, higher income people had easier access to green spaces in urban areas and the mountains. And the lower income people see it as a luxury. Until one day, a group of leaders in the nature conservation space recognized this and organized historically marginalized communities. And because of this, local movements such as green space conversion, establishment of community gardens, and awareness of ADA accessibility policies happened until finally nature access became more equitable compared to before. And ever since then, green spaces are not as exclusive as it was.
Fantastic. Lovely. That's great. Do you see the power of saying until one day? You know, if you just use that kind of thinking, things are like this. They're stable and not so good until one day something happens. Somebody does something different, and then things flow from that. And that's what we're talking about, this transformative moment. Lovely. Very nice. Jonathan.
Oh, thanks. Once upon a time, everyone saved their money and went on long flights to faraway places to see things they had never seen. And every day, tens of thousands of jets took off and landed all over the planet. Until one day, they realized that the exhaust from those engines was placing gases right where the maximum heat was generated by the atmosphere. We all cried at the damage we had caused. Because of that, myself and a small group made a firm commitment not to fly until the travel could be done without such serious damage to the world. And because of this, others saw the honorable commitment and joined in, until finally, a major undertaking was launched to build electric aircraft and stop the rapid heating from older aircraft. Then everyone could fly ethically.
Very good. Lovely. Excellent. Really, really good. Just make sure those all are written up. I'm just going to add a little bit more to that. They're super. They're really good. You should be proud of all of those. Some really nice material. What a final thing. Now, we haven't really got enough time to go into the kind of the writing detail that we would have here, but this is to kind of say, I'd just like you to enrich those little story spines a little bit. And the idea here is I use this little thing called a 1-inch frame, and you need to go tight in a story. The better the story, the tighter the framing of it. Let me put it the other way around. The tighter the framing, the better the story. So if you've got a 1-inch frame, you're going to go in really close and tight. So it's usually better to talk about one group of people, one transformation, one community, rather than saying all sorts of things, because people connect with the one, they recognize themselves in the story. So location should be highly specific, time of year as specific as possible. In Japan, they have 72 micro seasons through the year of 5 days each, and each of those seasons is highly described and understood. Put in your story something about sounds and smell and taste, and then how did people feel about what was happening? So we're not going to do all of these, but if you could just take your existing piece and just add in something that might be a specific location, the time of year, when something happened, when that until one day in spring, or until one day in the depths of winter, or until people served up a very special cultural meal, then something happened. It could be you described the color of a car, or that the birds were singing, or what blossom can you smell, until one day when the orange blossom was out. And then you just know that there's a beautiful smell. And all of those things change the way we feel when we hear about them. And that is the gold seam of story, is making people feel something as a result of the story that you are telling. So could you just, we're super short of time, but just take your your transformation story spine and just add in a little bit of enrichment detail to that. You can do it in a different color if you want, or you can just add it in further. What kind of very specific detail would you add that just starts to bring your story to life for the listener or the observer? Enrichments. Just pick on a couple of things. I mean, if you don't know the detail, you could make it up a bit. It doesn't matter at this point. Think in terms of this 1-inch frame. Go really, really tight and describe something really tightly. So Jonathan's example of the electric plane, you might describe the first electric plane that was flight worthy. How far did it fly? It flew 30 miles or 100 miles, and that made people happy. It was a day when the birds were singing in spring. Or you could even describe the color of the plane. The plane was purple. Would you believe it? As I say at the top here, mess it up a bit. Don't worry about the structure. If you've got the basic structure, you can start now thinking about how you're kind of this is now, we're in the editorial side now, where we've got the rough material. Now we add a little bit more detail that just makes the story live a little bit. Okay. Right. I'm just going to ask you just to add them in and send them in as your written work rather than go around the feedback at the moment. But I want to make the point that this enrichment's part of the process. Once you've been through it once and you begin with your story creation, you will be starting to think about what are the sorts of highly specific detail that will make people remember the story, that they will then hang on to that and be able to tell you about it in a week's time or a month's time, because there's something in there that made them feel, as a result of the story, made them feel happy or sad or excited or whatever. Okay, right. So closing section. We're down to the last few moments now at the moment. If you could do the following. We've created some material for the beginnings of the HPAC or other organization story bank. You can apply this in your own organization or your own work. It doesn't have to be just for HPAC, but they're hosting this. So if you could send your content to me and to Dennis, I'd be super grateful. There's the 2 emails there. Jules Pretty at essex.ac.uk. You've got Dennis's email address. And I just want to finish with 3 slides, just to wrap this together, just to say this is how we're thinking about these kinds of big transformations by being really specific about story. So as you finish those bits, this figure is in the paper that has been sent around to everybody. The What Makes Good Story, and this is the 3-act structure of story, but not as is often reflected. Here, I just want people to think about there's a before that occurs before your story, and there's a beyond that occurs afterwards. And what we need to be aware of is that there is a kind of territory of all that comes before your story, what people call the great roar of eternity. This is ordinary world before you get into the special world of story. And good story only suggests that past. It has very little exposition. In fact, if you have a lot of exposition at the beginning, it's a killer for story. It just stops the energy. So usually when we're doing the editorial, we might write some exposition explaining stuff, and then we cut out all the explanation. We get straight into action. That's what we need to be doing. The central part is the arc of the story. It has the events and actions as we've just described. It has distinctive places and micro-seasons. There's a transformation, and there's a phrase used in story which says, come in late and leave early. So when you begin the story, anything that is really explaining stuff, you just cut it out and just move straight into the action. See what it feels like. And then you leave early. One of the killers, another killer for story is the tradition of explaining what the story was all about. You know, you in the kind of Aesop's fables kind of tradition, at the end you have, and the moral of the story was, well, don't do that. That is just a killer, because that takes the agency away from the listener. You just leave before that point and you let the audience fill the spaces. They're the ones who will be understanding what you're saying without you explaining it. And the trick in all of this, and we haven't done much of that today, but but I've hinted at it, the arc of subsong in the story is the feelings, emotions, and memories, the blue boxes at the bottom. The audience becomes immersed in the world that you're telling, and the story is changing them. And if the story does change them, you've won. You've got something that really, really works. So that's the central component here of what we're trying to do. I'm going to come to these two things in the next a couple of things I'm now going to delay to the next meeting. But essentially, this is what we've been talking about. Story and transformation is about tipping points, social, ecological, and sudden change. That personal changes are hard. They are things that we find hard to do. And people are going to find these things hard. Habits and fixed action patterns are hard to form and doubly hard to break. And we're asking people around the world to break habits and fixed action patterns in what we're doing. And we need to hold their hands as much as we can. I'll just finish this bit, Robert, before I come to your question. The story maps routes and paths. It gets us in the game. It gets us taking that first step. And it shows change from bad to good, good to bad, the arcs that we've created. And we're hoping to create an emotional link with the audience. And if you could just hold that thought, what is the emotional link in the story that you've been writing? Those examples there. What is the thing that you're trying to make people feel? Trying to make them feel proud that something was able to be achieved, or so forth. So creative content, if you could send your files then to me or to and to Dennis, or just to Dennis, if you haven't got the email there written down, but jpretty@essex.ac.uk, then we will combine them together for the next meeting. And I'll stop that bit and just go to Robert, because you raised your hand.
Well, yes, it wasn't a question, actually. I wanted to just finish by telling you a little story. It'll only take a second. You have to visualize, I'm sitting in a hospital with my father in bed. He's 93. He's just been told that they're going to switch the machine off and he'll be dead within an hour or so. And he is musing on his 63-year marriage. And he says, and you used this expression earlier, which is why I thought of the story, it was like a fairy tale. Now, I was very shocked because I knew that my mother was a very difficult woman and that they had had a very turbulent and difficult marriage. So I asked him about this and I said, I don't get it. And he just looked at me, smiled, and his last word was grim.
As in Grimm's Tales. Right. Very interesting. Well, look, that's great. I'm glad you shared that, Robert. Thank you, everybody. We're not going to really kind of go around the room and say, what did you all feel? How did that all go? Because this is part one and part two follows in 2 weeks' time. I just want to say, super grateful for your participation in what we've done. There's a lot of good material there. We've got, what, 16, 17 people producing. If you've done 5 crowds each, then we've got 50, 60 plus bits of material. If you've done a couple of fortunately, unfortunately's, and then your story spines and then the enrichments, that's a lot of material there. And the point behind this is just to say, that's how easy it is to start. Okay, it's not that hard, actually, even though I said at the beginning, words often fail us, is that we're trying to take things that we know about and to use some existing structures of thinking in order to begin the story. And then you can take it off in any direction that you want. And there's not a right or a wrong about it. There's not a star for this kind of one and a D for that one. We just need the content to be able to then start to create narratives that will engage with audiences. And there are some tips in there. There is some stuff about saying, make your problem big because the payoff is going to be even bigger. Admit vulnerability. Go for some real specifics and tight elements of story. Don't make too larger claims for changing the whole world in one go. Change small bits because people will recognize that. Because most people live in communities, and if you do something very specific in a community, that's perhaps all they need to know. So that's my closing observations at this point. And we will stop, and I'm sorry that we've run over 6 minutes at the end. I hope that's not too much of a burden for you, but I look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks' time for the second one of these meetings. And again, please send your material, because that is a critical part of us being able to just reflect back some of those lessons as we go. And if there are any specific observations that you would like to have been able to make, like, I thought that bit was good, but that bit was rubbish. If you want to send them as well, that's fine. You know, that will help us kind of understand. All observations welcome. And I've got part 2 designed already, but with a space for feedback of what lessons we've learned and how we might now become more specific about addressing these really big challenges where words fail us. Actually, now we see that words don't have to fail us. We actually have a way into this. And that way may unlock the kinds of engagement that we wish in the next stage of the process.
Well, thank you, Jules. I can tell you it was a transformative hour and a half for me. I was absolutely amazed at how you've taken a short period of time and brought us along to such a degree. So thank you all for being with us today, and let's look forward to our next session with Jules in 2 weeks' time. Onwards.
Thanks very much. Yeah, onwards. Thanks very much, everybody. Have a good one. Speak soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jules. That was great. Thank you.
was great. It was great, Jules.
Thank you. Thanks for those words, Dennis. Much appreciated. And Robert, thanks for hosting as ever. Nice work. Thanks a lot.
Very welcome. Okay, goodbye.
Yeah, some really good. There's some super material there. Really, really good.
Yeah.
So I'm
Yeah.
super pleased. You know, that's high quality. Really, really good. Let's hope everybody sends in their homework, because otherwise we might have to send reminders, Dennis, afterwards.
We can do that. We can do that.
We can
Yeah.
do that. I'll liaise with you in the next couple of days, and then we'll take forward that next stage.
Absolutely.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks
Lovely.
so much, Jules. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. Much appreciated. And see you soon, guys.